Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Farrand on Film. We are in our part 2 of our Star Wars franchise chat. So we're talking the prequel trilogy today. So everything from Phantom Menace all the way through to Revenge of the Sith. I'm still joined. What did I just say? Did I say
Revenge of the Stiff?
Stiff? Jesus Christ. Let's do that one
Commenting on
again.
the acting already.
Oh, we've
I
got,
might leave that in. I'm going to
ladies
leave
and
that in.
gentlemen, we've got the start of our season 2 blooper reel.
Woo!
Revenge of the Stiff.
Revenge of the Stiff. That's staying in. You know why? I can't be bothered. That's staying in. We're going to leave it as Revenge of the Stiff, even though Revenge of the Stiff is one of my highest up on my ranking. Oh, dear. Yeah, so Phantom Menace to Revenge of the Sith. But yeah, I'm just going to be lazy and leave it in, and you'll all enjoy it. Right. Right. I've got a lot to talk about for Phantom Menace because I decided to include a lot of stuff about why they decided to go and make it other than just moolah and spondoolies.
All of the money.
Yeah. So bear with, and then someone else can talk about it first while I get a drink after this. So Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, was released in 1999. It stars Liam Neeson, Ewan McGregor, Natalie Portman, Jake Lloyd, Ian McDiarmid, Anthony Daniels, Kenny Baker, Penella August, and Frank Oz. It was written and directed by George Lucas. It is set 32 years before the original trilogy, during the era of the Galactic Republic. The plot follows Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn and his apprentice Obi-Wan Kenobi as they try to protect Queen Amidala of Naboo in hopes of securing a peaceful end to an interplanetary trade dispute. Like that, yeah, we'll get to that. Joined by Anakin Skywalker, a young slave with unusually strong natural powers of the Force. I wonder who this guy is. They simultaneously contend with the mysterious return of the Sith. Lucas began production of The Phantom Menace after he determined that CGI had advanced to the level that he wanted for the prequel trilogy's visual effects. Filming started in 1997 at Leavesden and the Tunisian desert. It was Lucas's first directorial effort after a 22-year hiatus following the original Star Wars film.
And it shows.
Yeah, it kind of does, doesn't it? The film's premiere was extensively covered by media and was greatly anticipated because of the large cultural following that the Star Wars saga had cultivated. Despite the anticipation, it received mixed reviews. While the visual effects, action sequences, and musical score, and some performances, particularly Neeson and McGregor, were praised, criticism largely focused on the screenplay, characterization, pacing, and the character of Jar Jar Binks. It grossed more than 942 million worldwide. It has gone on to gross over $1 billion with some re-releases, and obviously was successful enough to garner Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. So, going into production of it and like how the conversation started and things like that. So while writing the original Star Wars film, Lucas decided that the story was too vast to be covered in one film. He introduced a wider story arc that could be told in sequels if it became successful, and he negotiated a contract that allowed him to make 2 sequels and over time to create an elaborate backstory. While writing Empire Strikes Back, he considered directors in which to take the story. The original trilogy, Darth Vader was revealed to have been Anakin Skywalker, a once powerful Jedi Knight and a traitor to the Jedi Order. With that backstory in place, Lucas decided that the movies would work best as a trilogy. Throughout the 80s, he kind of dabbled with it. In the 90s, we had the resurgence of popularity of Star Wars in the wake of Dark Horse's comic line and Timothy Zahn's original trilogy of novels. Lucas then saw that there was a large audience for the prequel trilogy, and the development of CGI, and he began deliberating whether he would return to the saga and direct the films. In 1993, it was announced in Variety that he would be making the prequels, and he began outlining the story and saying that Anakin rather than Obi-Wan would be the protagonist, and the series would be a tragedy examining Darth Vader's origins. The relic of the original outline was that Anakin would, like his son, grow up on Tatooine. Lucas began to change the prequel's timeline relative to the original series. And yeah, this was kind of the final step into turning everything into the franchise. There was a 15-page outline in 1996. The film's working title was The Beginning, and he later revealed that the true title was Phantom Menace, with reference to Palpatine hiding his true identity as an evil Sith Lord behind the facade of a well-intentioned public servant. The larger budget and possibilities opened up by the use of digital effects, made Lucas think on a much grander and more epic scale. This is what I want Star Wars to be, is apparently what he said. And I mean, this was a little bit, I suppose, labored, but apparently the story ended with 5 simultaneous ongoing plots, one leading into another. The central plot is Palpatine's intent to become Chancellor, which leads to the Trade Federation's attack on Naboo, the Jedi being sent there, Anakin being met along the way, and the rise of the Sith Lords. In November of 2015, Ron Howard confirmed that he, Robert Zemeckis, and Steven Spielberg were all approached by George Lucas to direct The Phantom Menace, and all three turned him down and said that Lucas should direct the film himself because they all found the project too daunting. And this is where we are now. So, the one thing that we all kind of picked up on that is the whole interplanetary trade dispute. I think if we're going to go into weaknesses of this one, it's the whole Senate stuff. It's the whole kind of weirdly kind of casual racist Senate stuff as well. And the script is just poor and plodding.
Yeah.
But to be a bit more celebratory, I have such an affinity for this film, and I think it comes from the young age of like being around when this first kicked off into cinemas, and like I went to go and see it in the cinema. I went with sort of a family uncle.
Same.
And yeah,
I had a family uncle, like, because my mum and dad didn't like Star Wars, so I had a family uncle who took me to see all the prequels.
who's a little bit more passionate than like anyone else in your family would be about it.
Yeah.
And was brought up with the original trilogy. And I can't really remember his reaction to it, but I just came out of it and I was like, oh yeah, that was quite good, that wasn't it?
Yeah, same.
I really, really like Darth Maul. And I think this comes down to just liking this film and actually feeling and just still feeling that they shouldn't have killed him off. I know he's ended up making his way back in like other things and, you know, all this kind of stuff. He popped up at the end of Solo, didn't he?
To anyone who's just seen the mainline films, though, he died at the end of episode 1. So
yeah, and
I don't think it's fair to be like, oh, well, you should do your homework and watch this, that, and the other to get the true story. Like, no, like because I think it should exist within a film.
I think like probably one of the best villains that they'd come up with at that point. The double-sided lightsaber was like a mind blower.
Yeah,
it was like, oh yeah, look at this, what they're doing now. And pod racing. I love pod racing. I love the idea of it. Always pulling a face. We're gonna come back to that in a minute. There was a video game that was just pod racing. I enjoyed playing that. There was a huge arcade style machine one where you like held onto the handles and stuff. I loved that. Because this is the thing, like growing up, my mum would take us to Blackpool. She'd give us all a tenner, and I'd have spent mine in half an hour because I would have put it all in that. Whereas my sister converted it all into 2p's and played the tipping point machine. So I was just waiting around for ages. And I kind of wrote here. So I wrote pod racing and Darth Maul, and then what's not to like. And the what's not to like is Jar Jar and the Senate stuff. Because I thought people were being kind of cruel on Jar Jar. And then when I rewatched Attack of the Clones and he just turned up, I thought, oh, no, they're not. No, they're not. It's bad. It's bad. And he could have been any other kind of character, but it's so labored and it's so kind of grating that actually, it just doesn't work, does it? But again, I have a weird affinity for this film just because of how early I saw it and things like that. And I do actually. There are a lot of stuff that I quite like it. I think maybe in the same way, Ollie, that you were saying about there are flaws that you will admit pop up in Return of the Jedi, but ultimately you still like it. There are flaws that I will admit pop up in this, but ultimately I still like it.
Yeah, I think that is where I stand on it. I just think the flaws in this are a bit more fundamental. Like, not just for Star Wars, it's a lot more fundamental for a film. Okay. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions now. Okay. As someone who does love the film. So who's the main character?
I would say it's Qui-Gon.
But he's really boring and we can't relate to him because he's a weird space monk.
I don't mind Qui-Gon.
And then it's meant, George Lucas is saying it's meant to be Anakin. Okay, fine. Why do we not meet him until 45 minutes into the film or whatever it is? Why isn't it for this entire original trilogy Obi-Wan? Why is Obi-Wan not mirroring Luke Skywalker as the young idealistic Jedi who becomes this war-beaten?
Amen.
Like, that would have been such an interesting character arc, and you could have from episodes 1 to 6, that could be the Anakin story, and that's always the thing that's in the background, and you've got that thematicism behind it. Another quick question, and it might allude to a video that I've seen, okay, with another massive problem that I have with this film. Okay. I'm going to give you a character from Star Wars, and without saying what they look like, what their job is, anything like that, what they do in the film, I want you to describe them. So it's basically describing their personality, okay?
Okay.
Han Solo.
Maverick. Cool.
Yeah.
Uh,
Rebel.
fly by the seat of his pants.
Thief with the heart of gold, that kind of thing. Okay. Qui-Gon Jinn.
Wise man.
Is he wise? Is he wise? Because he constantly makes decisions. He constantly has decisions that get them in a lot of trouble. He's like, oh, well, there's a blockade around the planet, but we're going to get everyone in the ship and try and fly at them. Oh, that was my plan.
An element of gravitas to him, though.
Yeah,
like,
I don't have as much of a
I don't have a massive
problem with Qui-Gon.
But he's not. But it's just. It's not Qui-Gon in and of itself. It's more. And like I could give another example. A better example is probably Amidala. Then. What's her personality? What's her character?
You make a great point.
Like
tells Anakin she can't be with him, and then decides to be with him in the next.
Not
one.
in this film, though. Not in this film. And this really alludes to a massive.
Oh no! In this film, she is once Keira Knightley, now Natalie Portman.
Oh great! But that's broken the rules because I said without saying what they look like. Right. This really alludes to a massive problem that Holly has had with previous films, and I 100% am with her when she says these problems. And it's one word: cynicism. This was a moneymaker, this film. And you can see so many decisions in this entire prequel trilogy that are just about spinning as much money and trying to make Star Wars as accessible to as many people as possible. So Jar Jar, as great in his ears, is there for the toddlers who might be watching. I do have something to say in defense of Jar Jar later, though, weirdly. Anakin is there for like the kids who are about my age, about 7. It's like, oh, I could be a Jedi. I could get in the pod racer. All the Jedi action scenes were there for like the teenage crowd. Padme's there for the girls because she's got lots of pretty dresses. She's always in a different outfit because isn't that what girls love to do? And even casting Samuel L. Jackson as Mace Windu. Okay, Samuel L. Jackson does a terrible, terrible job in this series of films. He's awful in this series of films. It's not his fault. He's woefully miscast. But why is he cast in this role? Way back when they cast Billy D. Williams in Empire Strikes Back, it's because he was like one of the coolest guys out there. And the cynical side of you would say he would appeal to black people and get them to maybe want to come and see Star Wars if they didn't already, if they didn't have that affinity for it. Samuel L. Jackson's exactly the same. He's the highest grossing black actor at the time. You know, if you wanted to cast like a wise Jedi, you know, if you wanted to cast a black actor as like a wise Jedi figure, you could have had Morgan Freeman, you could have had Sidney Poitier, you could have had Forrest Whitaker, but they're not as big at the box office draw. And that's the only reason Samuel L. Jackson is in these films. And it's everything just does seem really, really cynical. And it really seems like George Lucas was surrounded by a lot of yes men, a lot of people who had challenged him on creative decisions in the past. He clearly got rid of, and now he had no pushback. So I respect this film in that it is entirely his vision. He created the film he wanted with no pushback. But the result is that you get things that just fundamentally do not make sense.
I'm surprised, like Adam, when you said the things that you like and the things that you don't like in this, that you didn't mention in either list, you know, Anakin as a child and his relationship with Qui-Gon and his relationship with Obi-Wan, because that's my problem with this film. I envisage a version of this film where it's Hayden Christensen then in this film.
A teenage Anakin, yeah.
An awful teenager, just like raising hell, using his force powers but not knowing why. He's emotional. He's flirting with Padme already, and you can already see that's going to be trouble. Him being a child in this really, it doesn't work for me at all.
It's a baffling decision,
when
isn't
you
it?
see that, yeah, and all the, oh, he's too old to be trained. Well, that's not something we've learned about in the films before. Luke was trained and was very significantly older. I realized that, you know, in the lore, they're younglings who start the training, but it's never clear to us that in this film.
We're expected to know that.
We've just got to take
like,
that on face value.
Yeah.
And there are so many odd things. And, you know, as a geek who likes the lore of this, I think watching it again, I didn't get this when I was a kid. I quite liked Jar Jar. I liked the pod races. I felt that it wasn't great, but I enjoyed the experience of watching the film. But watching it again as an adult, it kills the central interesting thing from the lore from the original trilogy for me, which is
midichlorians.
And I mean, I'm not going to talk for half an hour about midichlorians, but when you rewatch the original trilogy, and I didn't get it when I was a kid, but it is like the forces of religion that can be like talked away when the Empire is sitting around their conference table saying, oh, your ancient religion, I don't believe in this. That never struck anything with me when I was watching it as a child, but watching it again, it makes it much clearer that these powers that they have aren't set in stone. It's not something that everyone knows about the Force. It's not something that everyone believes in. Even the people who can use the Force, perhaps many of them don't really believe that it's real and they can't use it themselves. And then they just kill it. That was such an interesting thing about Star Wars, and they just kill it. Like,
yeah.
I can do a blood test. Oh, you've got the Force. Well done. No, it should be mystical. It should
just be Qui-Gon being like, no, the Force is really strong with him. And like, how is Obi-Wan, like, again, going back to it, why is Obi-Wan waiting on the ship? Because this is one of the characters that we're really, really familiar with. And Obi-Wan should be the one who was really rash and is like, oh, we need to train this kid. He's really powerful. You know, we need to get him back. And Qui-Gon should be the one who's like, oh, I'm getting really bad vibes though. Like, I don't know. And there's like making Luke a teen. And the whole, to be fair, I don't mind too much about the idea of the trade disputes, because I don't mind the idea that it's trying to get across, like, I don't mind them trying to get across the idea that the Republic is this big, cumbersome, bureaucratic organization, and that the Emperor can kind of sell the idea of a military dictatorship to the people, because it's like, look at all the stuff that isn't happening properly. I'll get it done. You know, just, you know, I'll start an empire, whatever. But it's very clumsy and it focuses so much on it. And it's like, how much better would it be if the opening shot is like a chase between ships? The front ship is Amidala's ship. They're trying to get to Coruscant. So they've skipped all the preamble at the beginning. It crashes on Tatooine. The Jedi go and rescue her because they're not going for a trade dispute, because why would you send Jedi to do that and not diplomats? They go to rescue her. They find it difficult. They find Anakin, who's a really good pilot, and we get to see him being a really good pilot. He helps them rescue the princess. That's where they meet, and he can be a bit flirty, or he can be a bit awkward because he's a slave or whatever. And then, because this is why I was pulling my face at the pod race bit, Adam. I do love the pod race. The pod race is an absolute marvel of a scene, and it is incredible. And like, as I could happily just watch that on loop, fine. It's a fantastic scene, and the effects are stunning in it. The hoops you've got to jump to get to that pod race are unbelievable. So the hyperdrive has got to be leaking. Okay, even though the shield did go up, so we know the ship couldn't be damaged. They have to land. Qui-Gon's like, oh, the hyperdrive, we need a new generator. Qui-Gon's like, oh, we'll try one of the smaller dealers. So there are other dealers that he could go to get this part. He goes to one and he's like, well, I'm not accepting your money. And no one else has got that part, I guarantee you. So either he's using an old as dirt sales trick, or Qui-Gon really knows how to pick his junk shop owners for spare parts. What would be the problem as well? So that Republic money, why doesn't he go and find a Han Solo type in a Mos Eisley bar or whatever and say, right, we've got this ship, it's knackered. Here's the money. Can you take the lot of us to Coruscant? Because I know since you go to Coruscant regularly, you can use this money. Like, there's so many ways that they could have got off of that planet that don't require a pod race. And I know that ultimately we do get a pod race out of it. I do feel like the pod race is to the detriment. Like that middle section just makes no sense. They have to jump through so many hoops to get a bet in place, to get a pod race and get Anakin off planet and stuff like that. And it's just...
Your criticism of that is built on or based on the world that's been built around the franchise, in that you expect that if we've seen Han Solo or a Han Solo-like character in another film, that there would be another Han Solo-like character in this place, and that if someone can do this somewhere else, someone can do this somewhere else. It's very inconsequential of things that need to happen for a reason.
But then the only thing that proves within the story is that the characters who are sent to protect, like every single one of our heroes, is stupid, because that they've landed at a spaceport. That would be my first thought is, well, our ship's knackered. Can someone else take us? Like,
yeah, okay, fair enough.
Do you know what I mean? Like, you're telling me that Jedi who regularly travel the galaxy and will be because you're saying, oh well, I'm aware of this universe. Are you telling me that people living in it wouldn't be aware of the rules of that universe? Because they're Jedi, they will have traveled, they'll be familiar with stuff, and they're meant to be empathic. They're meant to be able to sense stuff like a lot of it is like, oh, I guess the Force told him to do this so that he could find Anakin and he could grow up to be Darth Vader. But I frankly think that's a lazy excuse, because I think there's a way you meet up with Anakin on this planet. Like I said, you have to go to that planet to rescue Amidala because she's crash landed there on the way to Coruscant to escape the Trade Federation. You land there, you try to rescue her, you mess up because you're not that familiar with the planet. Anakin's very familiar with it because he's a slave for Jabba the Hutt, and you can have a nice tie in there as well. And him and Obi-Wan are at each other's throats a little bit because they're like younger brothers, and Qui-Gon's like the older dad, like, shut up, the pair of you, we need to work together. Anakin's a great pilot. He saves Obi-Wan a bit. That's where the friendship starts, because that's a problem that I think really becomes apparent throughout this. You've mentioned it before. You don't get the sense that Anakin and Obi-Wan are friends in this trilogy at all. And they missed a massive opportunity to start a real friendship in this film, because the meeting they have is just nothing. They meet each other and just shake each other's hands, and like Jake Lloyd, as well as he can act because he's not a very good actor, is like, you're a Jedi too? Pleased to meet you. Great. That's the meeting between two characters. And Alec Guinness in that one look is like, and he was a good friend. Like, you feel the sadness in that, like he's genuinely lost a good friend, and you don't see any of that in any of these films. But it should have started here.
Not yet, you don't. You get it a little bit later on.
A little bit, but for what he was talking about, it's like...
Because I think a lot of your reservations, just to go back to the point we were talking before, are at the point where the film was released, at the point where this film was released, I don't think you would have had those reservations.
No.
But you have them now because you know the capabilities of what came afterwards.
Right, but I also didn't question it because it's for the same reason I didn't question certain aspects of Empire. I didn't, parts of it went over my head when I was a kid.
Mm.
Later, when those scenes didn't go over my head, they made perfect sense. The bits that went over my head in episode 1, in Phantom Menace, when I've gone back and looked at it and tried to make logical sense of it, it's like, what? Well, why didn't you just do that?
Yeah, but you have... So what I mean is, I'm going to try and make something up now. Is, say, for example, you have something like... Oh, God, let's think of somebody. Let's use Daredevil for an example.
Okay.
Right? And Daredevil needs money to do something, right? Okay. And he needs to go and do something. So they do a whole arc where he goes and steals some money, and it's against his morals because he shouldn't be going doing anything that either, but he needs the money, right? And then 4 films down the line, or whatever it is, he makes friends with Tony Stark, right? At that point, you would go, well, why didn't he just go to Tony Stark for money? And it's because we'd not got there yet. So your thing of like, why doesn't this happen? Why doesn't this happen? Why doesn't it happen? Because we've not got there yet.
Right, but I
disagree very strongly.
Yeah, I'm not saying Han Solo specifically. I'm saying that at a spaceport where there
were
are
100 Han Solos in that bar.
But the spaceport was your second point. The Han Solo thing is, but again, like, do they know that there are smugglers? Because at this point, they what?
They're Jedi.
Port.
Right, but
they can read
minds. A well-known hive of
minds.
scum and villainy.
Yeah, and like, all right, failing that, why doesn't he take his ship, trade it in for a less fancy but working ship? Because anybody who's ever owned a car would be able to get their head around that concept of, I've got this really fancy ship and it needs one part to make it work properly. So I will sell you this at a cut rate that I can then use that money to go and buy another ship that's nowhere near as nice as this one, but it works and it will get me to where I need to go.
Are they
It's a
just
very-
too proud at that point?
This
Right,
is a very minor point that we're now arguing.
It
It was a
is.
minor point when Ollie mentioned it, and Adam's like, right, I can rip this apart, but it's still a minor
indicative-
point. All the
and-
other problems, even if we concede that you're right, which I do not, all the other problems we have still exist.
And it's just the reason I'm going ham on this point, because it is minor. The reason I'm going ham is that it is indicative of this entire film. It's clearly George had a cool scene here, a cool scene here, a cool scene here, and no idea how to link them together coherently. And the film is just a mess.
Which
as
is
a
essentially
result.
modern filmmaking.
To a point, yeah, but like even some of the more modern Star Wars films, the journey from A to B makes a lot more sense. Like even in Clones and Revenge of the Sith, the point from A to B still makes a lot more, like you have to jump through some
Because you
weird
do
hoops of
wonder,
logic in this film.
in terms of like George Lucas mapping the thing out, right? He's mapped out, this is where I'm starting with. So this is young Obi-Wan, this is young Anakin, all that kind of stuff. The end point needs to be, this is how he became Darth Vader.
Yeah.
All the stuff in the middle then becomes that's a good idea, that's a good idea, that's a good idea, but not necessarily too bothered about what happens in between. So that's the weakness of the script. That's the weakness of them not being able to put all these things in place and put all these things together.
Yeah,
And
it's very
sure.
you see through that. Yeah, well, you see through that with everything, because we're going to get to this later on. I would imagine that J.J. Abrams' script for Force Awakens, he spent so much time on, and like everything was kind of watertight, really.
Yeah.
But then when you get to Last Jedi, Rise of Skywalker, it's clearly nobody's thought about this as an actual trilogy, because there are things that get picked up that then get dropped that then come back again afterwards.
Yeah.
In the same way, just to critique something that you all know is one of my favorite things in the world, the Dark Knight trilogy in and of itself is, we start off with the League of Shadows, we forget the League of Shadows for the best film in the trilogy, and then we
Yeah.
bring it back in Rises. You've not clearly planned that out then, have you? Because if you had, you would drop things in, scatter, you'd scatter them around a little bit just to make that bigger
I think
picture.
that gets away with it more, though, the idea that the League of Shadows might have their distance or whatever. But yeah,
They might
like,
go back into the shadows
Yeah.
for a film.
We can argue those two different approaches, though, can't we? Because we can talk about this trilogy that we're doing in this podcast and say it doesn't work because he had his eye on 3 films. But then the original trilogy, we love the first one because it's contained within itself and then only became a trilogy afterwards. So
Yeah.
both approaches work and have their issues as well, I think, if you think of your
Yeah,
first
and
film
obviously
as
that
well, and it
original
becomes a trilogy
that
afterwards.
original trilogy isn't perfect because they didn't think beyond that film. So there are some things
Yeah.
that just don't make sense. Like there are lines where it's like Vader was not always Luke's father. Luke and Leia were not always brother and sister. Like that is obvious. But even with that plan in place, like it just makes
Yeah, I'm sure this will come up again while we're talking about this trilogy, but I really wanted to bring up Topher Grace's The Editor Strikes Back. I'm guessing you're both aware of this.
I've heard of
this
it.
phenomenon.
Oh, so he chopped it up, didn't he?
Yeah, so he's made
Yeah.
an 85-minute film of this trilogy, which is 50 minutes shorter than the shortest film in this trilogy.
Wow.
And only 7 minutes of Phantom Menace is in this 85-minute version of the film.
Okay.
I don't know what his story focus is for his version.
Probably Anakin.
I possibly. I'm guessing though it's Obi-Wan because he doesn't have any footage of young Anakin in it at all. It starts with Hayden Christensen. And it's literally the only thing he needs for this film, which has a coherent narrative that tells the story of this trilogy, is 7 minutes.
There's also a recommended order
which
for
I
watching.
assume is all Palpatine.
Yeah, who's the best? He's brilliant in this as well, even though he's not in it that much. But like, there's another ordering of watching the original 2 trilogies, if you like, where the recommended order is 4, 5, 2, 3, and then 6. It just completely skips over 1.
Crazy.
And
yeah,
Like, because there are several things, like, to not bash this film to death. I'm with you on Darth. I'm somewhat with you on Darth Maul. I love the design, and I agree that they should have had an overarching villain for those 3 films.
I don't think he's narratively necessary. I just think he's really cool. I wish he was narratively necessary.
Yeah, I think he does work as kind of an exemplar of like if you have Obi-Wan as the focus character and he's the one that's initially because he does still kill Qui-Gon. If he then like is tempting Obi-Wan to the dark side and you kind of tricked into thinking, oh, Obi-Wan's going to go to the dark side and it's actually Anakin. But like having that overarching threat across 3 films, I just think it might be a cliche, but I think that would have made it better. I'm just kind of torn whether I prefer that to be Darth Maul or Count Dooku. Because I think Count Dooku having that personal connection to them where he's got that personal connection though, and it would be quite an interesting tragic villain almost. You're not a fan of Dooku at all,
I quite like Dooku's gravitas, again, similar to Qui-Gon. I believe him as an older Sith Lord, but I think getting something out of maybe Dooku having Maul as his apprentice would have been
and it being the big reveal that actually Maul wasn't a Sith and like Dooku was this because you're then tricked into thinking that Dooku is going to become the Emperor, and like you could even have Palpatine, because they never say Palpatine in the original film, they just call him the Emperor, so you don't know, unless you're like, hang on, that's the same actor, which is something I might do these days, but that could trick you quite well. That would be a nice little plot twist in there.
You've just reminded me of something, talking about an order in which to watch it. So this is a little bit of a side note. So Jordan King, who I follow on Twitter, hi Jordan, if you're listening, he retweeted something that was done by a Sky Talkers podcast. I'm not too familiar with that podcast, where they talk about the nesting order. So apparently it works like a Russian doll. It sends you deeper and deeper into the Skywalker saga. So the order is 7, 8, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 6, 9.
My God, what a mess!
Which But we discussed this when we were talking about what order to do them in, what order to do these podcasts.
So like the first time you hear about Luke Skywalker is when when Rey's like, Luke Skywalker, I thought he was a myth, and then you get to see the myth in action. Is that the logic behind it?
Yeah, I would suppose. Yeah. Because you'd go what, Force Awakens, Last Jedi, then New Hope, Empire, Phantom Menace. Yeah, that's crazy. That's a crazy order. Yeah.
And to defend Jar Jar as well, I actually didn't hate him as much as I thought I would when I last saw it, because I watched him quite recently. I didn't like, he is incredibly grating, and I think if you just gave him a normal voice, he would have been fine, honestly. Michael Jackson wanted to play him and was really, and when you see him move, you can see a little bit of Michael Jackson, I think. But Michael Jackson was then really weird with Ahmed Best, who ended up playing him. When they met at a concert, and Ahmed mentioned it to George Lucas, he was like, oh yeah, because he wanted to be Jar Jar and you got it, so he's angry with you. But
Nice.
I think Jar Jar does not get enough credit for being a great CGI character, in like visually. Like he blends in for 1999. His effects look good, and like it's a precursor to stuff like Gollum, which is obviously incredible. Like I think Gollum's much better realized in terms of even the effects, but they've got like 5 years on top of that and their own production. And I really do like the effects in this. Like the prequels get a really bad rap for, relying way too heavily on CGI. But I think like Phantom Menace has the most models of any Star Wars film. And I think it shows for the better. Like the space shots do look really, really good. Like all the ships flying and stuff like that. And a lot of the battle sequences, like they look really good because they are still using models. They're just supplementing it really well with CGI. And a lot of the world building in the background is the stuff that's done with CGI. And I think it's a very, very, it's the best looking film of the prequels, I think. Because they've still
very CGI heavy.
Yeah, like it's after this that they lean on it way too much. But at this point, the model use and the CGI in there together, it's a really good blend, and it's a very good looking film. But it's very like the room where they have the lightsaber duel with one of the best bits of John Williams music ever, the Duel of the Fates. That lives in my head rent free. But that room, that giant power station, it looks cool. But you're telling me that a people who could build that are completely crippled because some trade federation is blocking them out, like blocking out their trade. Like, it's just there's loads. That's the problem. Like, you've picked me up on this before, like nitpicking. But you can when a film's good enough, you don't nitpick. Like the little things you're happy to let go. Like you don't question why Luke and Leia have that kiss in Empire, despite the fact that they turn out to be brother and sister, because it's a brilliant film. You can only nitpick it if the film's not engaging you as much as it probably should be doing. And
fair enough.
I do love this film. I'm so nostalgic for this film, but I can't say that it's good. I love it, but it's a bad. Like this is a guilty pleasure for me.
Sorry, Holly, go on.
Sorry, I was going to say I don't want to keep talking about Phantom because I keep looking at the clock and every successive podcast is going to get longer. But I've just been reading about the Editor Strikes Back, and the only footage from Phantom Menace is the fight with Darth Maul, and that's the opening scene of his film. And Qui-Gon's death and telling Obi-Wan to train Anakin is the end of the kind of cold open.
Because that actually would be a great opening sequence. Yeah.
The text crawl at the beginning is completely new, and he talks about how assassins have been sent to kill the Queen, and the Jedi have been dispatched to protect her. And then you open on that fight, and it's the assassin.
Yeah.
And that makes so much sense. And then the rest of his film, the focus is on Obi-Wan's relationship with Anakin, because that opening is Qui-Gon telling Obi-Wan that you need to train Anakin.
I need to look at that quote then, because that sounds incredible.
I am quite
It's
fascinated.
not available online because of the copyright.
Yeah.
It's been shown.
The idea
once.
of fan cuts, I'm quite fascinated with, because someone did The Hobbit as like one film rather than three.
That was Topher Grace as well. Or
it?
I'm sure several people have done it, but Topher Grace did that after filming Black Klansman to kind of, get rid of all the horrible white supremacy that you had to take on board to play David Duke. To decompress afterwards, he did a giant recut of the Hobbit films.
Yeah.
Ask Sam about my recut of Batman versus Superman, where I took out all the Superman apart from the bit where
Batman versus.
Basically it was like all Batman, and then the first point you see Superman is when Batman is driving around a corner and Superman just appears.
It crashes into him,
Yeah, because then what it does basically for the first 45 minutes to an hour is just Batman going, who's this Superman guy? Like, who is he? What's he supposed to do? And then he pops up as like an ethereal being.
Yeah.
Just because I was adamant that there's a better Batman film in there, which there is, it turns out. Right, let's get into Attack of the Clones then. So this was 2002. This isn't going to go well, is it?
We all agree on this one, so we can wrap it up in 5 minutes.
We can.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. So directed by George Lucas, written by George Lucas and Jonathan Hales. Obviously, the 5th film in the whole overall franchise, the 2nd episode of the saga, if you're doing them in that order. It's set 10 years after the Phantom Menace, where to make Ewan McGregor look older, we've given him a beard, but Natalie Portman doesn't look any older at all.
Neither does Samuel L. Jackson.
I was sure you were going to say Natalie Portman had a beard then. I was like, I
don't remember that cut.
At all.
As thousands of planetary systems slowly, what is that word? Secede, right? From the Galactic Republic. And join the newly formed Confederacy of Independent Systems, led by former Jedi Master Count Dooku. With the galaxy on the brink of civil war, Obi-Wan investigates a mysterious assassination attempt on Amidala, which leads him to uncover the clone army in the service of the Republic and the truth behind the separatist movement. Meanwhile, Anakin Skywalker is assigned to protect Amidala and develops a secret relationship with her. Soon the trio witness the onset of a new threat to the galaxy, the Clone Wars. So obviously this was done after Phantom Menace. Development began in March of 2000, and it was one of the first motion pictures shot completely on high-def digital 24 system. It was released on May 16th, 2002, and received mixed critical reviews, with some hailing it as an improvement over its predecessor, The Phantom Menace, while others consider it to be the worst installment of the franchise. The film was praised for an increased emphasis on action, visual effects, musical score, and costume design, but criticized the screenplay, Christensen's performance, romantic scenes, and underdeveloped characters. It performed well at the box office, making over 650 million, but it became the first Star Wars film to be outgrossed in its year of its release. So I've written a couple of things down, just because, again, I mentioned to you guys that I rewatched this because for whatever reason I thought I'd not seen much of it, and then it was only through rewatching it where I thought, actually, I've seen a lot of it. There's way too much, and I mentioned this on the last podcast, of, oh, not again. Oh, don't do that again. Do you remember when we did this? Do you remember when we went and did that? In the same way that, like, it's quite endearing in Avengers when Hawkeye and Black Widow are saying, oh, you remember Budapest way different to I do. This is all like, oh, yeah, I've saved you 9 times. No, it's only 8 because that one doesn't count because that one means this thing. And, like, come on, I like world building, but not as hammy and in your face as this is.
Well, you know why it's as egregious as this, right?
Why?
Because all of that was done in reshoots, because they realized when they watched the first draft of the film, as I kind of alluded to before, these two great friends, they spent the entire film just at each other's throats.
Yeah. So instead they go, do you remember that time when we... Yeah. We had that trip to Tesco and we really liked each other.
Yeah.
Like, I've written a word here that I can't say, and I totally forgot that I can't say it, but I've written acting is beep, which is a bad word.
Bobbins.
It is.
The acting is bobbins.
It is. I do not think it's their fault.
Hey?
It's not their fault. Hayden Christensen. Yeah, Hayden Christensen is more... He's a fine actor.
Yeah, because Hayden Christensen said, right, what's my direction for this? You need to be a creepy weirdo. What you need to do.
But like, George Lucas has a very, very earned reputation for being a terrible actor's director. He's great at making a shot and making it look the way he wants. But you know the way Spielberg will basically manipulate kids into getting a really authentic and good reaction out of them, and he will be able to work with actors in order to get a good reaction out of them so that they look like they're acting so well. Spielberg's amazing at that. Lucas is terrible at it. And like, you can see, like if you look at any of the behind the scenes stuff with him, where he's actually talking with his actor, like he'll spend hours with his digital effects guys, like, oh, make his hand go like this and make his ears move like that. He never stands there with an actor who's like, that was really good, but could you say this with, try it again. Let's try it with a little bit more urgency, because, there's a lot of stuff going on. Or, you're looking a bit creepy there, maybe dial that back in a little bit. He never has those conversations with his actors. And these people are then placing an enormous amount of trust on him to get a good performance. And it's only really in the entire prequel trilogy, it's only really the British actors that come out of it who can hold their heads that high. Like, Ewan McGregor's great throughout this, despite some of the awful dialogue he has to say. He's the only one who makes me feel things when he says awful dialogue. Christopher Lee is from that old school style of acting, so like he can say the campiest stuff and he'll still make it sound epic with his big booming vibrato. Ian McDiarmid's obviously great. And yeah, I gave Qui-Gon a bit of stick, but Liam Neeson does very well with the limited stuff he's got. But he's gone on record and said, it wasn't acting what I did in Phantom Menace. It was just like puppet work. I felt like a puppet. Like, I wasn't able to really do anything. And just, it really comes to light here because there's so much focus on Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman and their awful love story. And they're not strong enough actors.
Can we do a bit of quick maths here? Right. So what age are we saying Anakin is?
19. 19 or 20.
In Phantom Menace?
Oh, 9.
9, right.
9.
So he's 19 or 20 in this one. And how old would Amidala be?
In this film? Or Phantom Menace?
Holly's on mute.
Muted,
Holly. She's talking, but she's on mute.
Sorry. Isn't she supposed to be 14 in
She's meant to be 14 in Phantom Menace, so she'd be 24. So like the age
so
gap
it's not too bad then.
But you've still got that thing of, I knew you, I was a teenager, I knew you as a child.
That's why it shouldn't have been a child in the first one. It just makes no sense whatsoever, especially if they planned it out the way they did, which they obviously did, because we know what happens. We know he's going to have a kid. Yeah,
because so I've put a couple of things out here. So I do like mostly the plot. the whole idea of Anakin going dark and all that kind of stuff. I'm kind of ignoring the acting that happens, and I'm more thinking narratively. I actually don't mind the stuff of Obi-Wan going to see the clones and getting Jango Fett involved and all that kind of stuff. The Senate politics can go die a death, as far as I'm concerned.
There's not that much of it here, though, to be fair.
There's
Like,
not much of it.
They tone down on
you
it
get
a lot.
Yeah, when you get it, it is like, right.
Yeah.
The one thing that I've actually written the word vom is when they're about to go out into that kind of like gladiator pit thing, and she turns to him and she just says, "Before we die, I want you to know that I truly, deeply love you." Like, get off. Shoot your face.
How's George Lucas was married? How does he think that this is how two people have a conversation? And
this is the one as well, isn't it? Where he says, "I hate sand. It's coarse, it's rough, and it gets everywhere."
It's coarse and rough. And that's the thing. Like you're not Hayden Christensen's acting, and like it is bad. Give him credit though. When he's not got dialogue to say, he's fine. So when he's reunited with his mom and he's saying things that you would expect anyone to say, you know, like, "Stay with me, mom," he's fine. He's acting really well. And then when he looks up and John Williams' music tells you that he's angry, he looks ready, like he looks fuming. It's like, oh, like I've never found him intimidating. Like you don't find him intimidating at all up to that point because he's just this scrawny brat and he's really annoying. And then he looks up towards the camera and it's just like, oh God, no. And then he goes on his killing spree. It's like, yeah, I can believe that. Like I know it.
Which one is this? The one where he kills the younglings?
No, Tusken Raiders.
That's
the Tusken Raiders, the Sand people.
The third one.
So he just goes like because the Sand people kidnapped his mom, so he just murders them all.
Yeah.
That's a great scene. I love that. But the love story in this is just like how much more fitting would it have been if they weren't both like, "Oh, we can't." Like, because that's the whole love story here. Like, we're supposed to care about this love story because they're telling us they can't fall in love. We understand why he can't because he's a Jedi. Why can't she? Why can't she?
There's a throwback to it, isn't there, in Revenge of the Sith, where he has a dream about her dying in childbirth.
Yeah.
And he can't really talk to anybody about it because they can't know that they're together.
Right, that's fine.
Yeah.
Like, but they can't know that. But that would still be true if what had actually happened was she was really interested in him and she kind of put the moves on him a bit, and he was like trying to turn away temptation as he would the dark side, but ultimately he succumbs. And like, I'm not trying to like, it might be a bit dangerous to basically compare Padme to a succubus, but there's a nice like thematic bridge there of Anakin is likely to succumb to temptation. Like he knows he should not have feelings for this woman, and this like she's almost, you know, she's kind of putting the moves on him a bit, and he doesn't want to because his Jedi training tells him that he shouldn't, but he's thinking, well, stop my Jedi training. Like I love this
is the
woman.
pretty girl that I've liked for a long
and
time.
it also like I kind of alluded to it before, like I was playing Ghost of Tsushima, which I don't know if either of you two have played. But like the whole theme, like it's basically the story about an island off the coast of Japan being invaded by the Mongols, and the Mongols easily overcome them because as samurai they have strict codes of honor and they're really, really predictable in battle, which kind of nicely mirrors the Jedi. They have these very, very strong codes that you cannot break. And Palpatine, because he's really clever, is like, well, they can't do this, so I'm going to do this because they can't counteract that. And the hero ultimately has to break his code. And his uncle, who's like his father figure, is like the typical Jedi of he's so unwavering in his beliefs that it's to a fault. And it would mirror in really nicely with the Jedi in this, because ultimately that like they could have really gone down this route of the Jedi are too steadfast in their beliefs for their own good. And that was what resulted in their downfall. We've had to kind of interpret that as fans later on, because ultimately what we just see throughout these films are the Jedi just being stupid. Like it's so obvious that Palpatine is up to something and they just do nothing about it. Yeah. The Jedi throughout these, and it's really obvious here as well.
I think there's a bit in Revenge of the Sith where they go, the council are worried about him. We want you to go and like, and it's just like, what?
Right. Well, you've already established that. You've already established that you can find out if people have got the Force by doing a goddamn blood test. So why don't you get a blood sample from him and check his midichlorians?
Oh, your count's down. you're a Sith.
Yeah,
that's the problem we have anytime the Jedi are in number in something. It doesn't matter in the original trilogy because there's one person and then there are two and then there are three and that's it. But as soon as we have lots of Jedi around and they have any kind of power, you just have to wonder how do they have any kind of power? Because
they're incompetent.
Their code clearly means that they shouldn't be able to function in this way. If as soon as someone succumbs to some kind of temptation, they instantly become Sith, which seems to be what goes into these films and what it feels like to me anyway, then they're just a great big time bomb. The Jedi Academy is just a gigantic time bomb.
But it's the fact that they don't explore that. Like, if they'd explored that would have been so interesting in the prequel trilogy. The idea that the Jedi are just nah, we're sticking to this because it's worked for us for however long. And maybe Anakin's frustrations stem from the fact that he tries to do things slightly differently, and they do pay off. Like Jin in Ghost of Tsushima, he does things that would go against the code, like little and often, but Obi-Wan's and even Obi-Wan is a bit sympathetic to him because in our version they're friends. They're not a scolding teacher and his bratty student constantly at each other's throats. And I do like the Obi-Wan arc of him playing detective and his scene with Tamora Morrison as Jango Fett is great. Like, that's actually some really good acting, two people actually acting against each other. But I don't like that these two characters that were really meant to know the bond between and explore that bond between, like, as soon as we can get them apart in the film, we're going to do it because we're going to explore this, this love story. And it's like there are so many ways of doing that don't separate those two and let us explore that relationship more.
It's just pants. I don't have a lot of stuff that is in depth to say about this film because I just can't care about it. And that means quite a lot to me because this franchise that I absolutely love, and when there are bad films in other franchises, it annoys me and upsets me, and we'll talk about this later when we go through our list of 1 to 9. Some of my ones at the bottom, you might be a little bit surprised why I've put them below other things. I feel strongly, I hate it. I just don't feel anything for Attack of the Clones. It was just a waste of 2.5. Is it 2.5?
Until Last Jedi came along, it was the longest.
Boring.
Yeah.
Can't care about it. And I felt like it didn't have the potential to be better.
And
it's just rubbish.
That is the worst bit. Well, we'll come to Yoda in a minute. I know you've got an issue with it, right? Of if you really like a film, you really like a film. If you hate a film, you hate a film. At least you can talk about it. If it's nothing to you and it's just meh, that's the worst.
Yeah,
it's absolutely the worst.
You've got to completely rewrite the script of this film to make it work, and it has been done really well. I'm going to recommend some further reading at the end of this episode, if you like, for 3 YouTube videos, which I don't know if you've seen, but they are amazing. But can we talk about Yoda briefly and how?
Right, is your issue that he uses the lightsaber?
I think there is a way to get him to use a lightsaber that is not, or don't get me wrong, me as a kid lost my mind at this. Me as a kid was like,
yeah, look at this.
Yeah, he's jumping around, but it's like, okay, well, why don't all the Jedi, because they just established that Dooku is basically on par with Yoda in terms of force ability, because that's a stalemate. So why isn't Dooku flying around like that as well?
Because he's old.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah, and Yoda's best lesson in Empire is the idea of not judging someone based on their physicality. And it's like, well, I'm sorry, Yoda. Clearly, you do need to be competent with a lightsaber to be a good Jedi. If you're gonna have Yoda using a lightsaber, he should have been like Mr. Miyagi. Do you know what I mean? Just he does one move, and in that one move, he blocks your lightsaber, flicks your lightsaber out of your hand, and then force push it. you know what I mean? Just really deliberate.
Yeah.
He shouldn't be like, look at me, I'm flipping all over the place.
This is the problem with like a catch-all power like the Force. It's not like superheroes who might have very strongly defined thing, or mutants even better,
Yeah.
have a very strongly defined thing that they can do. The Force is so all-powerful that when you get to someone like Yoda, who we are constantly told can wield it in amazing ways, the only thing that is a barrier to him doing anything he likes is imagination. And when we're seeing it in a film, the only thing that is a barrier to him doing whatever he likes is the filmmaker's imagination.
Exactly.
Like, why would Yoda, this incredibly powerful character, need to jump around like a varsity gymnast, doing the floor? Like, what? Why? When he could just entirely collapse the entire building in on itself, or push it, explode it into a million pieces that then fly at his enemy? That they're just his imagination is his only barrier, and I don't think that Yoda would have that barrier.
Because it would explain how he's that strong as well. And it's the like, don't get me wrong, like even now, like when watching it back, it was like, okay, yeah, this is kind of funny. But I should not be thinking that when Yoda's showing the full extent of his ability. I should be like, when Yoda does what looks like a much less impressive thing in Empire, he lifts the X-Wing slowly out of the swamp. My jaw's on the floor at that point, because it's like, oh my God. And you've never seen anyone move something so big, ever. Like, you'd barely seen anybody moving anything. And people in the prequels are moving things left, right, and center. So they're clearly used to it. And it's just like this image of him getting out this baby-sized lightsaber that would probably be about the size of like this pen to me and you. And it's laughable. It is like, if you're gonna give him a lightsaber, like I said, just have him be like, or in fact, a better example of how I think he'd be moving. Do you remember at the end of The Matrix where Neo realizes he's the one?
Yeah.
And he just like really calmly is just like block, 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 block. Then just starts doing it with one arm, block, block, block. Like barely breaking a sweat. Like that would be a great exemplar of how powerful Yoda is. Doesn't even look anywhere else. He's just constantly looking, like Dooku's like going furious with his lightsaber. And Yoda's just like, yeah. I could do this all day, mate, honestly. Like, that probably wouldn't have been as visually engaging, but from our standpoint, us growing up and knowing what Yoda's capable of, that would have been, I think that would have been far more powerful. And, like, maybe he could go a bit ham against Palpatine because they're more on equal terms. But again, like, Palpatine hates lightsabers, so why does he have, like, God.
Let's move on.
It's a bad film. We should move on.
Let's talk about something a bit better.
Yes.
So, Revenge of the Sith, 2005. Once again, starring everyone who we've had up to this point. And this is set 3 years after the onset of the Clone Wars, established in Attack of the Clones. The Jedi are spread across the galaxy, leading a large-scale war against the Separatists. The Jedi Council dispatch Obi-Wan Kenobi to eliminate General Grievous, the leader of the Separatist army, to put an end to the war. Ollie's shaking his head already. Meanwhile, after having premonitions of his wife Padme Amidala dying in childbirth, Anakin is tasked by the Council to spy on Palpatine, also known as Darth Sidious. Palpatine manipulates Anakin to turn to the dark side of the Force and becoming his apprentice Darth Vader. At the same time, Anakin's love Padme gives birth to twins Luke and Leia. However, due to her discontent of Anakin being Darth Vader, she passes away due to a broken heart. That's what it says on Wikipedia. Yeah, exactly. Lucas began writing the script before the production of Attack of the Clones ended, citing that he wanted to end the trilogy with similar aspects of a romantic tragedy, thus building in Darth Vader's state at the beginning of the film. It was filmed in 2003, and it premiered at Cannes, which I thought was bizarre.
Wow.
On May 15th.
What did they think of it?
God knows.
What the hell is
May
this?
15th, 2005. Released on May 19th, 2005. The film received positive reviews and was deemed as an improvement over the previous two films, with a praise for its action sequences, mature themes, score, visual effects, darker tone, and the performances of Ewan McGregor, Ian McDiarmid, Frank Oz, and Jimmy Smits. Criticism largely focused on the film's dialogue and aspects of Hayden Christensen's performance. It broke several box office records and was the second highest grossing film of 2005, and it holds the record for the highest opening day gross on a Thursday. Ollie, your biggest issue there seemed to be with, where is it, General Grievous?
What a stupid name. Like, and when you saw that design for the first time, you were impressed, right?
Yeah.
This giant hulking robot, and it's like, okay,
Who
fine, we're
coughs?
getting another
A robot who coughs, an asthmatic robot.
Why is he meant to be funny? Like, he could have been. And in the book, I've actually read the novelization for this film, weirdly, and in the book he's terrifying. Like, you know, the Nemodians who are like piloting the ship with him, one of them like disobeys an order from him, so he punches that Nemodian in the face and crushes his skull, rips him out of his chair, throws him, says to the guy next to him, "Congratulations on your promotion. Do you understand your orders?" "Yeah." "Do you have any questions?" "No." "Get on with it." Like, he's really intimidating, and here he's played for. It's just, oh god. This film is an improvement on the last two, but that's not hard. Like,
can I ask a controversial question before we get into the nitty gritty? So,
sure.
The end of the trilogies, this will come up in the next pod as well, I'm sure. We've got Revenge of the Sith here, and we had Return of the Jedi before. Return of the Jedi comes off the back of two great films, and we feel a certain way about it. This one comes off the back of two terrible films, and we feel a certain way about it. Do you think that does them favors, or do you think that does them a disservice? Because I still love Return of the Jedi, but perhaps I love it more than I should because I love the two before and I like those characters, so I'm invested. I don't like Revenge of the Sith very much, although I know it's better than the other two, but perhaps I should like it more. I'm so meh about the other two that I don't care about anyone in it.
I think this had been its own film. Sorry, I think if this had been like the only prequel film,
would we like it more or less?
Maybe. I think we'd like it more if it was the only prequel film, because it does hold up a lot better. Like, the effects aren't as it still leans way too heavily on CGI, and there are it is still not a very good film. Like, cinematically, it's actually still very boring. Like, someone's broke it down really well. Like, the action sequences are great, but that's because you've not got a physical camera anywhere. Where George Lucas actually works with actors, Adam might Adam, this might kind of click with you. The blocking in it and the filming of it is very just soap opera. Mm-hmm. It's very A camera, B camera, over the shoulder shots whilst they're having a conversation. And when that's getting a little bit boring, they'll just walk over to a window. They'll do a little bit of a walk. They might be sitting down. They might be walking down a corridor. But the conversations are never done in an intriguing way. And I think it's really, like, this is probably the worst example, because you've got great action set pieces at the beginning. And then there's a long stretch of a lot of exposition and dialogue. And then you get to like Grievous, then you get to Order 66, then you get to the attack on the temple and like the action sequences at the end. Like, it is an interesting one. I think it would be better received, but the film as it is still a poor film. And I think it does. And maybe Return of the Jedi wouldn't be as well received, but I do still think it's a better film than this, just in terms of like actual filmmaking more than anything.
Do you think Revenge is poor?
It's there's so much I do love about it, but like I said, like I am now that it's one of those, I really wish someone hadn't pointed it out to me. I've got the burden of knowledge with those scenes now, because now I'm just so bored in the talking bit. And this should be where the conversations are the most interesting, because this is where Anakin's like, nah, screw this, I'm going evil. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, the conversations in this film could have been so interesting, and they're just like the only conversation that really grabs me is the conversation in the Opera House, Darth Plagueis the Wise, because that's like world building within world building. It's really interesting, and it's only stuff like Star Wars that gets away. Like, Harry Potter's a big enough universe to do it as well, but like Ian McDiarmid's carrying the scene. for the most part. Hayden Christensen has the odd kind of, is it possible to learn this power? And again, I don't blame him. He's given some janky lines. It's not his fault. But Ian McDiarmid is a powerhouse in this entire film. It's difficult. I think it is a poor film, but I do love it.
To go back to Holly's question, I think the reason why I don't like Return of the Jedi is because of how strong the other two are.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why I like this is a mixture of probably the dip in the middle, because I do still quite like Phantom, and this is the one that I have the biggest, one of the ones I have the biggest affinity for. Similar to Phantom, this came at a time where I was 15, and I would have been, to 2005, I would have been in year 10, okay? And this is going to sound weird and totally not related to Star Wars at all. But obviously, around about this time, you're gaining independence. So I'm going out and I'm going to Manchester with my mates on a Saturday and stuff like that, and we're watching films like that. This was the first in a few that kind of carried on with this. We did War of the Worlds in the same way, where me and my mates just went to the cinema on a Friday night, and it was kind of like us getting even more independence and us kind of just being able to do it, and like your parents giving you the independence to do it. And we went opening night on a Friday. We'd booked our tickets beforehand. It was a big thing that we looked forward to, and we all loved it. And admittedly, I think the opening scene is great. I think the whole dogfights in space, the whole Star Wars element of it is great. There are bits that do drop down, Ollie, you're right, in terms of exposition and things like that. I really like the Grievous stuff. I'm not a big fan of him because, again, I don't get the whole idea of him coughing and all that kind of stuff. But the scene where Anakin kills Dooku and
that's
Palpatine
incredible.
says, he just says, kill him now. That was dark. And I was just like, yeah, I'm into this. And then the whole end sequence from this is how he becomes Vader. The whole turmoil of Obi-Wan not wanting to fight back against him and just saying Anakin, just let it go, just leave it alone. And he won't do, and he's just persistent and he keeps going at it. The one thing that will admittedly kind of bring it down a little bit is that you were on such an emotional heft and an emotional high at the end of that film with Amidala dying, you're seeing him become Darth Vader. That in itself became an iconic scene. But then the damp squib of him going, no, and it was you should have just left
I
it.
laughed when I heard that.
You should have let us see the pain and anguish in another way.
Yeah, I remember this being the first film where I really was and it was very late in the film, but this was the first film where a line, a bit of dialogue, actually made me cringe. And it was when Padme says, I don't know who you are anymore. Anakin, you're breaking my heart. Who says that? I've got no problem with you crying there because you've basically found out your husband has killed children. But, you don't need to say you're breaking my heart. And it's just...
Yeah,
also,
we get,
yeah, and as a minor note as well, potentially, when Obi-Wan is, looking back on Anakin, the good old days, whistling, oh, he's a good friend. I don't think any normal person would be saying that about a person who killed children in a genocidal event.
Yeah,
I would actually be uncomfortable talking about that guy personally. Who, I think there's some scenes all the scenes you said there that are positive, like killing Dooku, stuff like that. I do love. I just do wonder if there's a better way to do it to serve the overall story. Maybe as it could have been quite thematic actually if he force chokes Dooku.
Yeah.
Because that became a proper motif for Darth Vader. If that was the first time he ever force choked someone, and he does it with his mechanical hand as well, because it's vengeance. The good stuff in this I do love. Even though that I can't the duel between Obi-Wan and Anakin at the end is phenomenal. It does go on for a very long time though, and you do question does it need to be that long?
I think you came to expect that though. Or at least I did.
You expected an epic, you expected an epic fight, sure, but it's genuinely 10 minutes long, which doesn't sound that long, but for a fight, it's we get it. They don't like each other. We just need to get to the bit where Anakin gets set on fire because that's coming because that's the reason he's in the suit.
I think the believability of Vader is done more service in this through him, through the knowledge of, he's killed all these younglings, and this is the fight that he had with somebody who's considered to be his best friend. And then like the not Ewan McGregor, but Obi-Wan and Anakin relationship gets increased tenfold here. You need to forget about, or try and forget about, all the stuff that came before and all the cheesy dialogue and all that kind of stuff. But
like that stuff is great, and it's
this
just
was
a shame.
as much retconning as they could do as possible.
Exactly, like the opening sequence where they're being dead chummy, like that was great, but why? Like that should have been the tone for the entire last film.
Yeah,
is those two kind of like, did you press the button? No, did you? No. And go on, Hall. I'm just kind of waffling.
I do think that that question, your answer, sorry, to my question was interesting though, because that's a very big difference in how we view these films, and I wonder if it goes through all films, Adam, in particular, that you have a stronger positive or negative reaction based on the films that came before, whereas I have a stronger nostalgic reaction or emotional reaction based on the films that came before. So because the quality of the films that came before Revenge of the Sith was poor, I can't bring myself to care about this one. Whereas in contrast, you're seeing the contrast and caring more about it because it is a step up. And the same for Jedi, I care about it more because I'm emotionally invested in the characters, whereas for you, it's more negative because the quality went down.
Yeah, in a weird way.
Fair?
Yeah, definitely. Because I think I'm very similar with other stuff. So when we get onto the next trilogy, I'm not a huge fan of Last Jedi, but that's because of how much I enjoy Force Awakens. Probably Rise of Skywalker. We'll do that later. And then again, just to bring back the Dark Knight trilogy, like I didn't see Batman Begins in the cinema, and I was quite late to it. I watched it probably months before I went to go and watch the Dark Knight, so not anywhere near the time of its actual release. But I love Batman Begins because of what it gave me afterwards. And then when I go and watch The Dark Knight Rises, like I know there are issues with it, but I will admit Rises is probably the one film that I am really, really blind to, in that I won't listen to the flaws of Dark Knight Rises because I think it's absolutely great and ends basically what I refer to as my perfect trilogy because of everything that came with it. So yeah, you are totally right that like everything that kind of comes before or after, or even just before, definitely links into what we have of, either a last one or a first one or a middle one. Yeah. Because even like something like the MCU now, you're talking 22 films or something? Like,
right, yeah.
Just knowing of where Endgame ends up, like that to me sums. I can look back at the MCU and just go, I like all of them, even if Thor: The Dark World is, but there's an affinity for everything now as a collection. So yeah, I don't know.
This is easily just the best of a bad bunch, isn't it? And
yeah. This is it, isn't it? Yeah.
Even though it's the best of a bad bunch, like unlike the two of you, there's nothing I can say about it. There's nothing in it that I can say I love. Like Ollie, you've used the word I love that quite a few times about this film. I'm still ambivalent. I could sit there and watch all three of them now and be like, meh, for the first one, and
it's just such a shame
for the second one, and this one is like, meh.
I think this is just peak Ian McDiarmid, though.
He's great.
He's great. Like in this in particular, and it even alludes to like he didn't want to do the lightsaber fight. The really awkward one in the middle where like 4 or 5 Jedi show up. Like Ian McDiarmid did not want to do a lightsaber fight at that point. It's just like that could have been so much more like alluding to what I've already said. If he didn't use a lightsaber and he took down 4 Jedi Masters, like maybe not Mace Windu, you can have Mace Windu stay in there because if you want to go that way. But yeah, I mean, the only thing I would say now is that further reading recommendation, and it's a YouTube channel called Belated Media. And he's done a bunch of videos, but the 3 big hitters on his channel have been what if episode 1 were good? What if episode 2 were good? What if episode 3 were good? And he basically does a rewrite of the whole trilogy. Like he imagines a situation where he's like a producer at Fox who has like script writing ability. and kind of works out the problems in the first draft of the script with George and gives us almost a completely different like series of films. Like one little change he makes is instead of everything taking place on Naboo, he just changes that to Alderaan. And that little change gives us something to care about when, you know, when we look back, it's like, oh, but Alderaan's going to get blown up. Like, this is so sad. And like Padme lives on Alderaan and Bail Organa is her brother who is kind of sympathizes with the separatists. And that starts his kind of like, this is why he ended up started the Rebel Alliance and stuff like that. It keeps Darth Maul all the way through and gives him a bit more to do story-wise, which is what I think Holly, you were alluding to as a problem with Darth Maul. Like, he's not narratively important, and it's like he has a lot more to do with the narrative in this. Is that he's kind of Obi-Wan's demon. He's his white whale a little bit, and like his draw to the dark side. The love story's a lot more organic. The relationship between Obi-Wan and Anakin is a lot more organic. It's a real. I'd be interested to know your takes. Like, having heard it, it's like, because Holly, you've said there's this super cut where it's like an 85-minute film, but if these were the films we got, I'm really sad that we're just not going to get these films now, because I'd love to see these films as they're presented to us by this guy. Like, that, it's the little changes he makes are just so good.
Yeah, no,
I will check it out.
Or belated media.
Okay. Right. Well, that wraps it up for our prequel trilogy. We're going to be back next week with our sequel trilogy, and we'll be wrapping everything up with a ranking. I was going to say definitive ranking, but I feel like there's going to be arguments, especially just looking again at mine.
Damn straight there's going to be arguments.
So in the meantime, you can support Farrand and Film by following us on Twitter at Farrand and Film, by liking us on Facebook at facebook.com/Farrand and Film, by heading over to our sponsor Offworld Tees and using the code Farrand for 15% off your order, and leaving a 5-star review at your favorite podcast provider. Stay safe, look after each other, and we will see you next week.